Good morning to you all. I hope this presentation meets you in good stead. As usual, we continue to offer up our prayers for each other, for respective families, and for many who have faced disasters recently. I want to pray particularly for the people of Dominica who have undergone a horrendous storm, and we just want to pray that God will give them the strength and courage to get their lives together. And of course for all of you as well, God bless you. There is so much to talk about this weekend in terms of the gospel reading. I feel that if I narrow it down to just one theme, I would be missing out. This is the third parable that has what you might call a vineyard theme. You remember Matthew 20 verse 1, which mentions let me get this right. Matthew 21, which mentions the owner of a vineyard having two sons and sending them both out to work. One said he was going to work and the other said he was not going to work, and the one who said he was going to work did not in fact go, but the one who said at first that he was not going to go, he's the one who went. And then you remember Matthew 21:28, the owner who hired various workers at different points during the day, some early and some late, and he paid them all the same wages. What we have before us this weekend is Matthew 21:33. An owner who planted his vineyard and then rented it out and came back later to collect his produce. All of these are about God's kingdom. The story this weekend is quite simple. In fact, it is about a man who fixed up his land very nicely. He planted it, fenced it around, and set it up for growing grapes and producing wine. In fact, you might say that he made an investment. And then he rented out the whole lot to some tenants, and he went abroad and he came back to collect his portion of the produce. It's a common practice in agricultural places. You work the land and give a portion of the produce to the landowner. Except we are told that in this case the tenants chose to keep the produce for themselves, killing the servants and then the son of the landowner. It's an interesting parable that can be interpreted on several different levels. The landowner is of course God, and we are the tenants. And the arrangement made with the land indicates that God has certain expectations for us. We are not just living happy-go-lucky lives with no responsibilities. God has certain expectations for us. And the expectation is that we bear fruit. The tenants were left to cultivate the land, the plot of land, with the expectation that there will be something to show later on. It's interesting that the arrangement with the land is that part of the produce is for us and part of the produce is for God, the landowner. Some of what you produce is not for you. Some of what you produce is for God. It's the tragedy of the story that the tenants took over the vineyard because they wanted it all for themselves. They didn't want God to have anything at all. They wanted it for their own selfish motives. And it's the tragedy of life today as well, that some people throw God out of the picture completely. I sometimes speak to volunteers at the hospital. I see them all the time, manning the information booth, shuttling patients from their room to the discharge location and giving directions to people. Trillium Hospital is like a maze, and I ask them sometimes what makes them do it. Why do they give up half their day once or twice a week to help people? And I get various answers. Some of them had someone in hospital at one time and they received a lot of help when they visited. Others feel that it is the good thing to do, and some have friends doing it, so they simply join their friends. But the answer that I receive more than any other is that they have had pain and suffering in their lives at one time, and there was someone who was there for them, and they realized the hospital is also a place of pain and suffering, and they want to do their little part to help in some way. Suffering and pain sometimes has a way of bringing out the best in people. The flooding in the Gulf states, for instance, and the storms in the Caribbean, the shooting in Las Vegas just recently, reveals that people do extraordinary things under situations of stress. Why did a perfect stranger cover a woman's body, for instance, with his own, while shots were ringing out all over the place? And he promised not to leave her when she was shot in the stomach. Why did a man lift a wheelchair-bound individual over a fence and carry him after he himself was shot in the leg? These persons had nothing to gain and probably everything to lose. They were going contrary to the attitude of the tenants in our present story, giving something back to God, putting aside their own selfish desires. The other side of the story is that the tenants refused to live under God's authority. They didn't want God in the picture at all. God, in fact, was a nuisance who gets in the way of their selfish desires. They rejected God's representatives and saw them as threats to their own lives. It reminds us that sin is not primarily doing bad things, but an attitude of selfishness that has no need of God in one's life. A refusal to place ourselves under God's authority. We kill God literally and his messengers. I suppose the life of a priest is symbolic of our reading today. We give up family and the pursuit of wealth to serve God and others. It is why we wear black, for instance. It signifies an absence of earthly desire and a focus on serving God. So our reading this weekend focuses on fruitfulness. And remember that fruit and produce are visible things. They are tangible. God has put us in charge of his vineyard. We are to bear fruit, not only for ourselves, but for others as well. We are to give something back to God. This is totally unlike the attitude of the tenants in the vineyard, which focus on taking everything for ourselves. So my dear friends, the gospel reading challenges us to bear fruit. To bear fruit, and in bearing that fruit, to give something back to God. What do you have to offer to God at this point in your life? God bless you. Have a great weekend.